Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our five-part webinar on how do cities really work by IIHS University. My name is Nihal. I'm a researcher at IIHS. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Amir Bazaz and Dr. Aysha Jennath, where we'll be talking about one of the most pressing challenges of our times, climate change. Thank you both for joining us, and we really look forward to drawing on your experience, not only as climate researchers, but also people who are constantly engaging with global and national policy conversations on this very topic. Uh, to start with, maybe can we hear a little bit about yourself, your work, and the kind of work, especially in the context of climate change, that both of you do?
Aysha can go first.
Thanks, Samir. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aysha Jennath. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at School of Environment and Sustainability at IIHS. I've been trained as an architect and urban planner, and I did research on coastal areas in India, looking at the impact of climate change in particularly the western coast of India and small islands of India. Right now, I'm also looking at how rural to urban migration is happening in the context of climate change and what is the sort of risk migrants are facing in the cities. Uh, I'm also a chapter scientist for the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Cities, where I'm engaging with global policy on climate change. Over to you, Amir.
Yes, my name is Amir, and what I have done would probably uh, resonate with a lot of you who could be attending this webinar. So, I am trained as an engineer, and I worked in manufacturing many years. My PhD is in a business school. My PhD topic was quantitative modeling of what is happening in energy systems. And I shifted to the city landscape very early on in my career. At IHS, I do everything and anything related to climate, uh, but that's not important. An important identifier of me and myself. I think when I started looking at the climate questions, that's when actually climate questions started to be examined in the Indian context. So I'm some kind of a living archive of all that has happened over the last 2 decades in the space of climate change. I'm happy to be here discussing with my colleague Nihal and Aysha and encourage all of you to consider this program uh, as one of the options. I think only point that I can very solidly and strongly make is that if someone decides to choose this program, there would be no regrets.
Thanks, Aisha and Amir. Amir, so I think maybe we'll pick off from where you left off, where you said that you're like a living museum of how climate change and climate change policy negotiations and the whole field kind of developed in our country. So, just looking at that, what do you think? Why is it important that at this moment, why do we need to focus on climate change?
So, if people can go and look at uh, the global risk report that comes out every year in January from the stable of the World Economic Forum, they do a global survey and look at what are the key risks that's defining, shaping uh, public and private response. And consistently over the last few years, climate change and climate extremes has figured in the top three or four. I think what we are talking about and what we are also internalizing is a matter of survival. It affects everyone. It affects rich and poor alike. It has complex pathways through which risks manifest, in, gets experienced by a lot of people. So uh, I would say that it is survival at stake. And that's why it is very important to think about, study, and learn about. The second point that I'd like to make is that our country is witnessing phenomenal transition and transformation. And at the back of my hand, uh, I can list down three or four, and there are others also. For example, the country is rapidly getting urbanized. So, urbanization is an important transformation that we are all witnessing. But there's also a transformation that we are witnessing on many from many other perspectives as well. For example, health. Now we are getting into the territory of non-communicable diseases, which are very complex. Uh, the transmission pathways are complex. The vectors are emerging in complex settings, etc., etc. So there's a health transition, and uh, in cities, for example, we are not anymore dealing with diarrhea and malaria. We are looking at diseases like hypertension, heart disease, and these are not like rich diseases of the rich or sicknesses of the rich, but we are seeing this quite prominently in informal settlements, in poorer settlements. So there's a health transition. Everyone is aware of the demographic transition. A lot of young people coming to explore opportunities, etc. Now, all of this, what is simultaneously being witnessed, is at stake if we don't address climate. We will not, because of two important aspects. One is that climate is cutting into these transitions in complex ways, so it'll kind of make the transition stunted, and that has implications for the young people who are coming into the workforce. It has implications for productivity. It has implications for economic growth, etc. So that's one. And second is that uh, we need new uh, lenses and new ways to integrate climate into the narratives that have stayed for a very long time. And on both these counts, this course offers you a fresh perspective. So, why we need to do this is because our survival is at stake. Why is it important? Because there are so many things that are happening in the country at a very rapid pace. If we don't integrate climate into the existing development schema, then we will be not be able to realize what our collective aspirations are. I'll stop here.
Thanks. Uh, Again, I'll pick up on that where you said that one of the most defining phenomena or transitions currently is urbanization. And also the other kind of transitions that you spoke about, whether it's health and demographic transitions. One avenue where all of these converge is also like our cities. So my next question would be to Aisha. So how does climate change in the context of cities, why does it matter in the urban context?
Thanks, Nihal. So, what Amir said and what also you said, cities being at the forefront of all these transitions that are happening right now, and also cities being the concentration of large population, economic activities, at the same time a lot of climate risk and climate emissions. So these kind of put cities at the point where there is a lot of potential for both climate action and also thinking about how that can go hand in hand with development. This is particularly relevant for cities in the global south, where they're struggling with actually delivering a lot of promise that has been made in development dimensions while struggling with climate issues in a warming world. So then, how how are we going to think about climate change in the context of cities when there is already issues like inequality in access to resources? There is problem with access to public transportation. There is the issue of informality. There is many people who the city governments are trying to bring out of poverty. So all these kind of issues that the cities are grappling with already is being complicated by the impact of climate change. Just take the case of maybe Bangalore, which is the city right now we are in. In the last few years, Bangalore has been struggling with too less of a rain sometimes and too much of rain sometimes, and that has had implications. For example, a lot of the informal settlements that are in the city that are dealing with some of these problems, like access to basic infrastructure, access to equal access to some of the development opportunities that are developing in Bangalore. So this is actually quite a good example of why there is a need to talk about climate change in the context of cities.
Thanks, Aisha. So if I could come to you, so this is also the story of the cities, but there is also something that also happens in our rural areas, which also impacts our cities, whether it in terms of the demographic transition that you were talking about. So would you be able to shed a little more light on how climate change affects our rural counterparts and how that also has cascading and compounding impacts in the urban areas of our country?
So first of all, I think if we look at the way economic development is organized in India or globally also, there are these big pockets and centers of production. Uh, Historically, they were closer to ports because in order to be competitive, you need to cut down on logistics cost. So, and was also a gateway to access newer markets. So that's how it started everywhere around the world. And as technologies matured, costs started coming down, and therefore inland economic development started happening. So there is a diffusion, agglomeration in the process of economic development. But the way our settlement structure is emerging in India, we are not living in an era of binaries. So it is not like urban rural, distinctly defined and distinctly different. I think one is merging into the other, and the other is merging into subsequent other. So if we travel along the golden quadrilateral, I think you will struggle to distinctly define a pristine rural village. Nothing of that kind or that sort exists anymore. So that's like first thing. So the choices that we make in our cities in terms of low carbon mobility, the energy that we are consuming, the transportation networks that we intend to put in, has implications for what it means for rural areas. For example, if we don't leverage, if we put in a high cost mobility system that brings rural produce to markets and cities, then you will not be competitive. So that's one way in which rural and urban gets connected. The second aspect is that uh, if we take rivers, for example, so rivers are crisscrossing and it's flowing, emerging from a certain hilly terrain, for example, terrain or someplace, and then crisscrossing landscapes. Uh, and if I take the example of Bangalore, so Bangalore draws bulk of its water from about 120 kilometers from the city, and it comes from Kaveri, which is a river that flows across three states: Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. So there are implications for how ecosystem services are getting embedded in footprints of production and consumption. Much of it is not falling into binaries. So the choices that we make in rural areas impacts our ability to live in cities and live a decent or realize a decent quality of life. And the choices we make in our cities in terms of connecting with production centers in rural areas, particularly on the agrarian side, also has uh, implications for life in rural areas. So the 1947s and 40s and 50s of India is no more. We are living in 21st century where such binaries don't exist. And climate, for example, doesn't respect administrative boundaries. So it flows through. It's a global problem. It's a global negative externality that's impacting everyone, every person. So the rural and urban doesn't uh, kind of become an important uh, determining factor when we study climate. But I think the way we study here and we make our students learn is to understand how rural and urban is connected, and how climate is going to stress these connections. And it has implications for overall well-being, both for system well-being as well as for the well-being of people living in these two settlement types.
Thanks, Amir, especially for raising that point about blurring of binaries. And I think that's also particularly true in some of our big cities also. It's not that cities are just big buildings and infrastructure and gig economy. Like some of our biggest cities, be it Kochi, Bangalore, Bombay, and Chennai, they also concentrate a lot of populations that still survive and thrive on like very nature-based livelihoods, be it fishing. And I know that you have a lot of expertise working in the coastal parts of our country. So, is there anything that you can talk about the climate change story in the coastal cities of our country and how it impacts and what's going on there?
Yeah, so of course, coastal cities are being impacted. And maybe one of the things that I can point to as an interesting impact of climate change is the eastern coast of India has always been familiar with the instances of cyclone. There has been a historical there is a long history of cyclones in that area, and there is systems in place for dealing with cyclones in India. Compared to that, the western coast in India has little experience of cyclones. But what we see with the impact of climate change is that cyclones are becoming a little bit more common in the western coast of India. But there are no systems in place in the western coast to deal with these kind of incidences. So when cyclone Oki and Taute hit western coast, particularly coast of Kerala in 2017 and 2021, it had huge impact. There was no system in place. There were no disaster mechanism to deal with this kind of a hazard or this kind of actually a disaster. Then beyond that, that is just a sudden onset event that has like a big impact suddenly. But there are also a lot of slow processes that are happening in these regions that are affecting the lives and livelihoods of coastal population. So one of the biggest thing is actually sea level rise and coastal erosion. These have been happening for quite a long time, slowly eroding away the coastlines and slowly eating up the land and houses in these regions. This is happening both across eastern and western coast, but I'll because my work has been mostly in the western coast, I'll talk from that example. We see a lot of responses to these kind of events in the coastal areas, people upgrading their houses from more kacha to pakka houses to deal with these kind of impacts. But then what we see is that the impacts have multiplied over time. These kind of responses emerge. Then even the pakka houses sometimes may not be able to deal with the kind of high intensity events that is happening now. So that kind of leads to these kind of cascading impacts where some climate risk is happening, you are responding, but by the time you are responding, the intensity of that event has also increased, and then you have to respond even more. So then there are economic implications for how you respond. You might have to take a loan to improve your house, but then the house that you build by taking a loan has suddenly been impacted by a cyclone or a is coastal erosion. So that has then moved into the economic sector, and which means that further responses will be also becoming more and more compounded. You might have to move away from that area. That means even more economic, precarity that might come to you. So that is actually what needs to be talked about more rather than the simple impact of sea level rise or coastal erosion. Think about like what is the sustained impact, how is it moving into different sectors. There might be also health implications. Yeah. And like Amir was saying, there is health transition happening. So when these climate transition and health transition collide, and there are all these kind of events happening. What are the implications for that? So this kind of thinking has to happen, moving beyond simple narratives, but looking deeper into what is the cascading impact of some of these disasters. Yeah.
Thanks, Aisha. I'll just take a quick pause also to remind our people who have joined online if you to drop any questions and comments, to use the Q&A function to drop any questions that you have, and we can pick it up when we come to the Q&A session. So, thanks, Aisha, so much for bringing up the how showing us how people are responding to some of these impacts on their own. And so, building on that, I would like to ask Ahmed, because given a country like ours, there's no disagreement that climate change is a reality compared to some of our Western countries where there's still a lot of tussle on the on the actuality, on the reality of climate change. So, largely countries in the global south like us, that is not like a conversation that is quite prevalent. And I also know that you are somebody who has been involved in like the national policy discourses around this from the very early stages. So is there something that you can shed a light on how, as a country, what action that we have been taking at a much more national or policy level to tackle with this challenge?
I think over the years, uh, uh, a few things have happened, and mm, well, we have still a long way to go, but there have been some good achievements. One of the first things that we have been able to do over the last 2 decades is probably institutionalize the recognition of climate as a problem into programmatic and institutional decision making. I think that's kind of happened. While we still have a long way to go in terms of codifying the mainstreaming, but we have made a lot of good progress. The second thing is that we have made is that we have been able to. So we have always struggled with the three-tier governance system in our country. Struggled in the sense that it is not like a 1970s or a 1960s artifact. It started in mid 1990s and it has its own journey. And around 2008, 2010, climate became a phenomena, a very important phenomena. So while we were trying to fix administrative governance, climate came as an additional stress on the system. Uh, Over the last 15 years, I would say that at least at multiple scales, we have created uh, uh, a system that recognizes what the nature of impact, what is the nature of impact, and what could be the possible programmatic response. Uh, what in what ways we can programmatically deal with the crisis. So we have city climate plans, we have state climate plans, and these are also budgetary supported. So there's money also on the table. I think we have been able to do that. Third is that all kinds of stakeholders have been engaged in generating high quality granular evidence. I think the problem with the West is this attribution issue that whether things are climate or non climate is something to be differentiated. Over the last 2 decades, we have been able to institutionalize good science and we have been able to create a lot of granular data. And that granular data is not been able is not something that has kind of uh, uh, like uh, granular data which is not like some kind of a proprietary matter with scientific institutions like Indian Institute of Science or IITs or science education and research institutes, but every actor has contributed to this. So civil society actors, NGOs, etc. So there's been phenomenal generation of evidence at a granular scale, which has given a lot of confidence to decision makers to be able to respond to, because you cannot allocate financial resources if the evidence is patchy. I think that has happened. The fourth thing is the entrepreneurial ecosystem in terms of looking at market-oriented solutions. That's also kicked in over the last decade. So there's a good, healthy ecosystem that's looking at the problem space and thinking about solutions that are for everyone, solutions that are scalable, solutions that are low cost, etc. And that's kind of catalyzed a lot of innovation. So that's also kind of happened phenomenon. And the last thing that has happened is that I think uh, and Aysha also alluded to it in some ways, that from a pure play narrative of poverty, we have moved into the territory very strongly into the territory of climate induced vulnerability and climate induced inherent vulnerability. So the structural vulnerability concept that was very poor rich aligned has now moved into, it's expanded. So we are now talking about vulnerabilities of the ecosystem, which was only about protecting them, but nobody talked about the stresses that they were exposed to. To getting this idea of vulnerability mainstreamed into systems, but from a climate side, including recognizing that structural vulnerability defined by inequality or poverty is already there. But if you layer it with climate kind of induced vulnerabilities, then things become very difficult to handle. So these are very quickly 4 or 5 things that we have been able to deliver quite strongly. And of course, leadership. I think India has demonstrated that they are not going to fight this nonsense fight of who is to be blamed, but they have taken leadership and they have demonstrated that homegrown solutions, homegrown ideas have very important implications, and they have set up important and very substantial goals for themselves. So there is a net zero goal for 2070, and very recently Niti Aayog uh, released a 12-volume report making everyone understand what does it mean to reach that 2070 goal. I think it's phenomenal. I think no country at this scale around the world has demonstrated the kind of leadership that we have demonstrated. And I'll urge all of you present here as potential students to be leverage this moment, be a part of this important journey, because it will be a sour grape story. Because if you miss this ship, then you'll not be part of history.
So, Amir, you also brought about this point about how different stakeholders and different actors have been involved in this, be it the state, non-governmental actors, and also like the private players. A key component of this is also like the education, the university spaces who contribute to some of like the building of this evidence, and also some of who then go on to work into some of the think tanks with the government, with the private sector. So, what do you think is the role that education institutes like us play in this space about dictating what the discourse around climate change and climate action?
So I think the first point that I'd like to make, that the classical neoclassical economic growth model is important to know, but if we live in 21st century in modern times, we have to live in the moment. So I think our universities are in 20th century. We need universities that are in 21st century, which requires complete reordering of the higher education architecture. And let me explain what do we mean by this. Uh, in in 80s and 90s, we we used to get good disciplinary education, but people had to discover their practice while working, and uh, and people have discovered and done remarkable things. But they took their own time to process. The problem in today's time is the world is shifting at a nanosecond scale, and which means that we need new vocabulary, new articulations, new ways of engaging with the contemporary modern world. Our universities that are doing good work is still trapped in disciplinary domains. So you'll get good economics education, but it may not be economics and climate change. You may get good governance education, but they will not talk about climate governance. And that's why universities like ours, which are integrating a lot of issues simultaneously, because that's the real world. So mirroring the real world is what is important from a university point perspective. The second point is that I think historically we learn a lot when we implement and when we do things on the ground. Uh, if we go back into engineering education, and if some of you present here are engineers, we have a very important workshop component in engineering. Why do we need that? Why do we need that? Because we need to feel metal. We need to be empathetic towards people who are working on in those conditions. There's this concept of learning by doing. The learning by doing helps you to be closer to the problem, recognize what the problem is, understand the nature of the problem. And then you come back to university settings and ask this question very naively, that why these problems persist when so many theories have crisscrossed the world over the last 100 years. And the reason was that we were not bringing all these implementation learnings into the classroom. So there has to be an interdisciplinary orientation, but our education needs to be problem focused and solutions oriented, which means we need to learn from implementation. Both these are defining features of our university and our program, and that's the blueprint or playbook for new age universities.
Thanks so much, Hamid. And I think at this moment I'll take a question from one of our audience, which is related to this particular topic, and it's from Ravi Chandran, where he's asking that I'll just summarize it for you, where he feels that the awareness about climate change is still very superficial for most of graduate students in university spaces, and he would like your take on this aspect.
I wouldn't have agreed more. That's why we exist. But I think, Dr. Ravi, the important point is not that. The more important point is that there is a real world which operates, functions, and organizes itself in a particular way. There is an academic world which thinks about issues in a particular way. And we need to bridge this gap. That's one. Second, we need to be relevant. So the world is moving in a way in which it recognizes climate problem in a certain uh, manner. Uh, Now we can talk about agriculture endlessly, but now we are moving into an era where agriculture plus climate plus greenhouse gas emissions plus productivity plus land management practices all sit by side by side. So, as I explained in my earlier intervention, that so many things are simultaneously changing that if we don't bring all these systems, multiple systems together, we will not be able to crack this problem. And I think that's where I would emphasize more. So, first, it's a graded response. First, I think it's sense and sensibility towards understanding the integrated nature of the problem. And I think if in early years, maybe high school, we start getting people to appreciate the, the nature of the problem, that will be a good shift towards understanding that, look, yes, we need to make sure that our curriculum, our pedagogy is aligned to that reality. And yes, Dr. Ravi Chandran has also mentioned that multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity is the key. And traditional university spaces are struggling with that. And it will take some time, but I think if you need to be relevant, then you need to change. And that's the bottom line.
Uh, so Amir and Aisha, so while we are on this topic about education, university spaces, uh, and interdisciplinary education, just want to see what after like a program, an interdisciplinary program on climate change, what are like some possible meaningful career pathways where you can translate some of this knowledge that you have under you gain about climate change and intersectionality and interconnected challenges? How do you change that into some meaningful career pathway? And maybe you can also talk from your own, reflect on your own career trajectories to give them an answer.
Well, I was lucky because I got into this bandwagon when everything was getting formed or discussed. So I was in a way lucky. But I think there's an element of self-discovery also through the process. So when I teach, I learn in class, I discover new problems, I discover and appreciate the complexity of the problem. But the question that Nihal asked is important to note that I tell everyone who is on the webinar to go on LinkedIn and look at any job posting from a reasonably well-established organization, a consulting firm, an infrastructure advisory firm, EYs, KPMGs, etc. Even if it's a pure play kind of pure play job posting, they appreciate that you understand climate. Because as I told earlier, that I think there's a very important saying uh, of a very senior professor, Professor Michael Cohen, who teaches at the New School in New York. And he said that, look, he spent 50 years managing World Bank's urban programs, started early on from 1970s. And he said that we started entering into urban areas through bathrooms of houses. So we started fixing sewerage systems. Uh, and, uh, and then gradually everyone realized that, oh my God, it's a complex hell of a lot of a very complex, hellish problem, which is playing out at multiple levels. We are now living in an era where climate is in our bathrooms, but it's everywhere. You go out, it's everywhere. So no matter what you choose to do, you cannot ignore the skill that you will get through this program. It's pervasive, it's entered everywhere, and it's a skill to have. That is what. The second thing that I will tell you is that there's a skills report that LinkedIn does every 2 years, and the and they survey a lot of companies who hire, and all these skills which are we are going to give you is top three skills demanded by recruiters worldwide. Aisha, you can contribute.
As a young entrant, a new entrant into this whole field.
Yeah, so I was just completely agreeing with what Amir was saying about universities being stuck in that disciplinary kind of like rut, because that's exactly what I was going through when, as I told earlier, I was trained as as an architect and urban planner. It was during my urban planning uh, masters that I actually started to engage with climate change. So I had to do everything on my own. because my interest was there, I had to go out and see what avenues are there for me to kind of get into this field and start working in this field. And I realized that at that time, maybe best pathway for me was to do a PhD, and that is how I completely transitioned into climate change. So I think one good thing is that right now there is a lot of universities, including IIHS University, that is really recognizing the need for these kind of transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary courses. And even just a course just focused on climate change is so exciting to me that it is now happening. So in that way, if someone who is now trying to enter into this field need not struggle as much as I did maybe to break into this field. There are more opportunities and avenues available now. Now, maybe thinking about the job aspect, if someone is into academia, there is, of course, a lot of things to be done. As Amir was already saying, India has done quite a lot of work in generating evidence from the ground on how climate change is happening, how it is impacting, and what can be done in some sort of actions from the ground. But there are still under researched geographies. There are still areas which can be, documented a little more what is happening in that area, what can be brought out into the world in terms of evidences. So there is, of course, a lot of possible areas where evidence generation can happen. There is a lot of area for research to happen if someone is interested in that sort of, career trajectories. Then there is a lot of space for actually practitioners to do work in this, because again, what Amir was again saying previously, a lot of NGOs, a lot of think tanks are starting to work in this. If, for example, there is a lot of government actions also happening in this. There are state governments and city governments that are looking into generating climate action plans, state climate action plan, and they are all looking for people who can contribute evidence, people who can develop research or collect data. So I think there is a sort of demand to work with governments in, researching in climate change. So I may be talking a little bit more about research, but I think I can complement what Amir was talking about in terms of other kind of work. So basically, I think, yeah, these are some of the career trajectories that are possible right now if you are looking into entering into this kind of space. Yeah.
Thanks, Amir and Aisha, for putting that very nicely for our audience. And I'm aware of time, so I'll turn to the audience for some of their questions. And first question, maybe I think Amir, you would be better placed to answer this. Shruti asks, what implication does India's take on not phasing out coal in global discussions have on the progress of climate change mitigation?
So there is a concept of CBDR, that is an agreed principle which defines intergovernmental cooperation. And that principle is, if we elaborate CBDR, it says common but differentiated responsibility. So for India, priority is, so if you go and read the charter, the UN Framework Convention Charter, Article 3, if I am remembering correctly, clearly states that we enter into climate through development and through sustainable development. So that's like primary goal. So we will do and we are doing what we are supposed to do. And let me assure you that we are doing much, much more than what we were supposed to do. So our mitigation response is based on many considerations. First of all, you must recognize that physical capital, if it comes online, has to remain in the system for about 40 years. And physical system that remains in the system is also providing not only the physical output, but it's also sustaining a lot of jobs. So we cannot overnight transform and change our energy system. We need to balance development and climate goals. And let me tell you very confidently that the pledges that we have made and our nationally determined contributions are much, much beyond and much, much above than what we should be doing. So on that front, because we have now moved away from this blame game towards recognizing that climate is a necessity that defines our survival. We are one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. So if we act, it is in our national interest, but we will act based on what our national priorities are.
Next question we have is from Cassius, where he's asking, is low carbon mobility primarily about decarbonizing transport system, or whether it's increasingly functioning as a land value capture mechanism, where transit investments are used to unlock and monetize urban real estate?
So it's not an easy question to answer because there are multiple ways in which this question can be tackled. But I'll take a detour and basically try and explain how should we conceptualize, operationalize, and think about low carbon as a conceptual category. Uh, if we look at the origin definitions of low carbon, all of this started around early part of the 21st century, around 2000, 2001, 2002. And the idea behind concept of low carbon was that we will not compromise on our ability to live a certain quality of life, but we'll discover alternate pathways that are safe, that are secure, and defines and is moderated by or controlled by national ambitions. That's the definition of low carbon. So when we think about low carbon or low carbon mobility, it is it is as it while greenhouse gas reduction is important, but employment is equally important. Service access is equally important. Safety and energy security is equally important. So all of this comes together as a combo when we think about anything that has a prefix or a suffix that alludes to low carbon. So all what Cassius is saying is equally valid, and it is also to be discovered in real time. And one important example is that even if we, for example, at this moment, suddenly generate so many electric vehicles, uh, and we offer those electric vehicles free of cost to people who are using a certain kind of IC engine technology, still the shift is impossible because mobility and transport architecture is very complex. There are many moving parts. We have to think about greenhouse gas mitigation equally with employment and GDP contributions. So that's the concept of low carbon, and every country has discovered their own definition of low carbon. Every sector has discovered its own, and if you join, you will discover your own definition.
Thanks, Amir. I know we are almost at the 1 hour mark. Maybe we have time for one more question. And I have a question from Kartike, where they are asking.
I have read that question. I think this is
Okay.
an interesting question, and so it is like precisely why you need to come into this program and try and solve this because uh, climate challenge uh, is a problem that has challenged us on many counts, and so we need different kind of governance regimes. We need different kind of market setup, both product markets and technology markets. We need a climate aligned discourse that understands employment equally as it understands climate. So there are a lot of things that we need to unpack and understand. And uh, You have given the example of Delhi. Delhi is also a classic case of uh, multi-level governance that is failing. But I think there's also an opportunity there. So if you look at and read uh, uh, histories of development, you'll understand that when nations succeed, they succeed because there's an organized collective action that you can operationalize, which comes from innovative governance models, which will emerge, which we need to discover, which we need to test. And that is precisely the reason why we need motivated youngsters like you who can come and think with us in classrooms to discover new paradigms, new frameworks, and new experimental models.
Thanks, Amir. And if there is time and appetite for one more question, I think it's very related to what you were just responding to, is how can we move from, like, increasingly we do respond to things very reactively. How do we move from a more reactive sort of a way to responding to this challenge to a much more proactive way, given the fact that you also mentioned that we are moving at a nanosecond pace? It's a question from Hemant.
Yeah, I think we've always believed that if you put in a good institution uh, in one place and give and empower that institution that to integrate, uh, we could discover a model where climate could find prominent place in all decision making that is happening. That's one. Second is that I think uh, uh, is that I think uh, vision is important. We need a long-term perspective if we need to move in a particular direction. And if you look at contemporary India, we have very strong uh, visionary moments. For example, we have certain milestones that are clearly defined. We need to be a developed nation by 2047, and we need to be net zero by 2070. And I think that helps to reorganize ourselves effectively. And if we have decentralized leadership that institutionalizes responses, creates good institutions on ground, I think we'll be able to integrate climate in every matter of decision making and every issue that plagues us.
Thanks, Amir. And on that note, I would like to close today's webinar. I want to thank both Amir and Aysha for helping us unpack such a complex issue for our audience. And for everybody who joined, thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions and your engagement. And we hope to see some of you in our class maybe next year. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a
Thank you.
good
Thank
evening.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, Amir, Nihal, and Aisha. This was a very insightful session, and I think everybody engaged very well. For folks who are interested to come and meet us, the faculty, this Saturday we have open day from 10 to 5. Please do drop by, please do register. All the links are on the chat box, and you can look at it and join us for one of the sessions or the next webinar next Thursday. Thank you so much.